Welcome to Community Taking Action, ABCD's program highlighting people and organizations doing great things in and around the Boston area. I'd like to welcome to the program Libby Hayes, the Executive Director of Homes for Families. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
So, Homes for Families, it sounds like what it is, Home for Families, but talk about or explain to me the role of the organization and then what you do on a daily basis.
Great. So we were founded with the principle that, one, that we could end family homelessness, and two, that families who've experienced homelessness and those that work closest with them, shelter providers, needed to lead the advocacy and be involved in the policy making to achieve that. So we're a membership organization statewide, and have the core of our program is engaging and involving and taking leadership from families who've experienced homelessness.
And membership driven, advocacy, and I want to go back to the premise, we can end homelessness?
Yes, we can.
That's a driving concept.
That's a driving end it as we know it. We know that we have a lack of affordable housing. We know we have wages that don't pay enough to afford the housing that we have, and how do we change those forces to be able to have that housing stock to meet the demand of the people of the Commonwealth.
And so as Executive Director of Home for Families, with that as your mission, how do you go about putting that into practice?
We really work on educating, organizing, and advocating. So we work to educate people about homelessness, about the math that doesn't add up, about what the realities are that families face, what policies are, what are our opportunities to make change, and then work together to advocate for the resources that we need to make the change, to work on the practices so that people are included and that we're all working together in the same direction. So lots of meetings, lots of talking to people across all different sectors, across all different levels, and really bringing that knowledge together to be able to make informed policy changes.
With the work that you do, how are you, or is there a number of families that you're able to reach, through policy versus your leadership or advocacy? How do you get to them, and how many are you getting to?
It's a tough thing to measure, because a lot of what we do on both sides, it trickles down in different ways.
Sure.
So we have increased the amount that the state funds on the mass rental voucher program by 300% in the past 5 years.
The rental voucher program it's a subsidy.
It's a subsidy. It's similar to Section 8, but it's funded through the state. It was funded at about $30 million 5 years ago. Now that's up to $90 million, and we're looking to get it up to 120 to restore it as where it was funded in the 90s. So that advocacy alone has resulted in new homes for thousands of families, not to mention maintaining the vouchers for people that were in it. Another thing that we work on is some of the shelter regulations, so access to shelter for families that aren't unable to make other options work. There was a proposal last year to really limit shelter access, and we were able to stop that in collaborate. Everything we do is in collaboration with other organizations, and that would have been about 1,000 families who, if we weren't able to stop it, are currently in the shelter system that wouldn't have had access before.
And you work with a range of folks. You work with, as you said, the shelter providers and families, and you do some specific work to help families shape their story or tell their story?
Yes, we do lots of workshops and trainings, and also have an ongoing curriculum-based public policy series. It teaches about the state budget process, about public policy, about sharing their story, about public speaking, about working with the media. And those are families that, once they graduate from that, are invited to join our consumer advocacy team, which meets monthly and really is the heart of what we do. And they serve as an advisory board for us, a sounding board. They also fulfill a lot of the leadership roles and go on to become leaders for our own organization on our board, and also boards of other organizations. We actually have a board seat on ABCD's board fulfilled by a family that's gone through these programs.
Do you find it especially challenging to get families to step up and advocate, not necessarily because, or not just exclusively because of a want, but in terms of the ability? They obviously, if they're looking for housing, if housing is a challenge, or most recently was a challenge, does that come up, or do you find folk that are so far down the line where they've put it behind them that they can now come and give back?
There's a little bit of both, and I think one of the stories we often tell is there was a participant in one of our classes that came back after the second or third and said, "I figured it out. I'm not broken, the system's broken." Right. And how much empowerment there is in that. So there's often families, I think sometimes there's a misconception that families don't want to get involved because they're looking at housing, they're parenting, they're dealing with the day-to-day crisis, but oftentimes they're coming up against so many brick walls and dead ends and so frustrated that having a place to tell their story and having and being involved in the discussions to say, I keep hitting this wall, I can make a I can make a difference and try to change that. I can open some doors and to really be involved in a greater movement and see it's not just me that's running into this role, but a lot of us, and how empowering that is to work together. And every family there's lots of different ways that people can get involved. For some, it may be public speaking. For others, it might be giving testimony. For others, it's writing something. Someone else, it might be as simple as clicking share on Facebook. You know, there's lots, try to make sure that it's a lot of different ways that people can get involved, understanding it's not for everybody, but for those that get it and get fired up about it, then there's often no stopping them.
I want to shift now and talk about the economics of being homeless. And the reason for that is money the answer? You know, if I just threw some money at the problem, would that solve it? So help me to understand and help our viewers to understand the economics of homelessness and the struggle that you face.
And money usually is the answer and the problem. Homelessness will cost a lot to fix, but it'll cost a lot not to fix.
Right.
So when we look at the cost of homelessness, the cost of shelters, the cost of motels, the cost of transportation for children, the healthcare costs, the cost to education systems of having children go in and out of schools and transferring. So we see there's so many costs and hidden costs, the long-term trauma, when we look at small children that have to spend years in a hotel and their development in that, and then the interventions that's needed. So maintaining our current status quo of homelessness is very expensive. Right. So fixing it in some ways, in many ways, would probably be cheaper or about the same. The issue is in order to make that shift.
What is taking so long, you know, to get there? Obviously, if it's costing me today and it will cost me the same, or you know, maybe it'll be better for me later on. Why is it so hard to get policy to shift, you know, to address these things that seem very basic to some of us?
Right, and hopefully we're starting to turn the ship around a little bit. Homelessness, we've only had a family homelessness system since 1983.
Wow.
And the dynamic before then was a little bit different. You could be poor, and it was still a struggle, but the gap between housing and rent was a lot smaller. So you could be poor and afford a place to live. Okay. That really started to shift. But at that time, in the early 90s, the state spent about $120 million a year on housing vouchers. That was then totally cut down to about $20 million, $30 million, and then we saw homelessness skyrocket. So the issue, what's changed, is that gap between wages and rent, as I mentioned before, continues to grow. So the cost of a housing subsidy, the cost of fixing it has gotten higher, and the number of people in poverty has also gotten higher. So it's really become sort of continues to grow as the solution continues to become more and more expensive. But when you factor in all of those costs, but the way that government is run really is in those different silos. So really what we're hoping to see, we work as part of a coalition called On Solid Ground Coalition that really looks at trying to break some of those silos down. And the state just started, they relaunched their interagency council that hopes to look at that. And it's one of the things really trying to do is to push government to really consider those costs, that you can make a cut over here in housing, but what's that going to cost? Is that going to then lead to increased healthcare costs? So I think the more that we're able to really look at that, which isn't the way the government functions, but is the way that, or the way that even advocacy groups have functioned or different nonprofits have functioned. We all have to watch our bottom lines. We have our mission, we have what we want to do, and how do we break out of that and really take a more holistic approach and look at people in the center of that and not just our budgets and bottom lines.
So as we come up against, you know, the end of our time, I really want to thank you for coming on the program. I certainly have learned a lot, and I think our viewers have learned a lot too, and, you know, maybe we'll join.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us.
Libby Hayes, thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our program. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you've missed any segments, you can catch them on YouTube. Thank you for joining Community Taking Action. I'm your host, Eric Mitchell. Until next time.